Eleanor Reese had always believed that a life of sacrifice was a life well lived. At 68, she looked back on decades filled with quiet choices, turning down the promotion to stay home with her son, saying no to the sabbatical in Europe so her husband could accept a military post, shelving her master's thesis because little James had a fever that wouldn't break. Some might have called her life small, but to her, it was sacred. When her husband, Walter, was reported missing during a training accident overseas, she was 58. The news was delivered in person, with folded hands and solemn expressions. They never found a body, only wreckage. She grieved silently, alone. James had just started his family then. Lena was pregnant, and Eleanor didn't want to bring gloom into their bright beginning. A decade passed. Now, living in her son's home in Kentucky, Eleanor filled her days with purpose, or so she told herself. She made Eli and Clara's school lunches, read them bedtime stories, folded laundry with the precision only a teacher could possess. Lena often thanked her, but always with a strained smile, like politeness forced through gritted teeth. James, overworked and often distracted, rarely engaged in more than quick hugs and a mumbled, "Thanks, Mom." Still, Eleanor found peace in the rhythms of the home. She loved the smell of toast in the morning, the sound of cartoons drifting down the hallway, the feel of warm socks fresh from the dryer. These were her small joys. She journaled each night, jotting down moments. A kiss from Clara, Eli showing her a drawing of a rocket ship. She reminded herself that these were the rewards of a life spent giving. In the early days after moving in, she had hoped for long talks over tea with Lena, perhaps even shared recipes and motherly advice. But those hopes dissolved quickly. Lena was guarded, territorial. She ran the household like a tight ship, and while Eleanor tried to be helpful, she often felt like she was treading water, trying not to make waves. There were unspoken rules. Don't suggest how to parent. Don't rearrange the pantry. Don't touch the thermostat. Eleanor obeyed. She adapted. She always had. She filled her quiet hours with books and crossword puzzles. She clipped coupons, baked banana bread no one ate, left notes in the kids' lunchboxes. She tried not to notice when Lena repacked those lunches or tossed the bread untouched. Every Sunday, Eleanor visited the cemetery where Walter's name was etched into a memorial plaque. She brought lilies and whispered updates. It gave her comfort, a place to anchor her grief. Still, something in her ached. It wasn't just the absence of her husband or the shift in her relationship with her son. It was something deeper, the sense that she had slowly become invisible. Not unloved, perhaps, but unnoticed. Her kindness expected, her presence convenient. She told herself not to be dramatic. She had a roof over her head, food to eat, and the laughter of grandchildren in her ears. But some nights, she sat in the dark kitchen, fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea, wondering if anyone truly saw her anymore. One evening, as she scrubbed out a casserole dish no one had complimented, Clara wandered in. "Grandma," she said sleepily, "why do you always clean up by yourself?" Eleanor paused, smiled softly. "Because it's what grandmas do, sweetheart." Clara blinked, then hugged her legs. "I see you," she whispered. It was such a small thing, so small. But Eleanor went to bed that night clutching the warmth of those 3 words like a life raft, and in the days that followed, when the smiles thinned and the silences grew longer, she held on to that one moment of being seen, even if it was fleeting. At first, Eleanor tried not to notice the subtle shifts. Family dinners became shorter, conversations quieter. James was often glued to his phone or buried in work emails, nodding absently when she spoke. Lena smiled less, replacing kind gestures with passive-aggressive corrections. "Actually, Mom, the kids don't need that much butter." Or, "We've decided to cut screen time so no more cartoons after school, okay?" The word "we" always landed like a gavel. Final. Unchallengeable. Eleanor reminded herself it wasn't personal. Raising a family was stressful. She tiptoed around boundaries, adjusted to the unspoken rules, and kept her presence small, as if shrinking would help preserve the fragile peace of the house. But over time, that peace began to sour. James and Lena started holding family planning discussions behind closed doors. Decisions were made, vacation schedules, school choices, even Clara's birthday party theme, without a word to Eleanor. She would hear about them secondhand, through the kids' excited chatter, or from a passing mention at the dinner table. She felt like a tenant, not a mother, an accessory to a home she'd once dreamed of growing old in. Still, she held on. Until the cookie incident. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor had baked oatmeal raisin cookies, Eli's favorite. She placed them on a cooling rack and called the children in with a warm smile. Clara reached for one immediately, but Eleanor gently stopped her hand. "What do we say first, sweetheart?" she prompted kindly. "Please," Clara chirped, giggling. Eli echoed, "Please, Grandma." They each got a cookie and Eleanor beamed, but Lena entered the kitchen moments later, her face hardening. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the cookies. "I just made a small batch," Eleanor said, wiping her hands on her apron. "A little treat." Lena folded her arms. "We've been trying to limit their sugar." Eleanor hesitated. I didn't realize. It was just one cookie each." Lena knelt to the children. "What did we talk about, guys? About asking before taking snacks?" Clara's shoulders slumped. Eli looked confused. "They did ask," Eleanor said gently. "I just wanted—" "Mom," Lena cut in, using that sharp tone she reserved for cutting meat and conversation alike. "I'm trying to create consistency here. It's confusing when you undermine the rules." Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. James appeared in the doorway, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Lena said quickly. "Just a mix-up. Your mom gave them cookies, again, without checking." James looked between them, uncertain. Eleanor tried to meet his eyes. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine, Mom," he interrupted, rubbing his temple. "Let's just move on, okay?" That night, no one ate the remaining cookies. Eleanor swept them into a tin and tucked it into the pantry. The next morning, the tin was gone. She didn't ask. Days passed with cool civility. Clara was quieter. Eli avoided the kitchen when Eleanor was in it. The gap grew, not with a bang, but in a series of silences. One evening, as Eleanor sat reading on the back porch, she overheard Lena speaking in hushed tones through the open kitchen window. "She just doesn't get it. She doesn't respect boundaries. I'm trying to raise these kids right, and she interferes." James mumbled something inaudible. Then Lena added, "It's exhausting having her here. I feel like I'm living with a stranger who expects to be thanked for breathing." Eleanor didn't cry. She simply turned the page of her book, though the words blurred. Her hands trembled slightly, but she steadied them on her lap. She wasn't sure what hurt more, Lena's words or James's silence. That night, Eleanor didn't write in her journal. She stared at the blank page for a long time, pen poised, but nothing came. She wasn't angry, not yet, but something inside her shifted. The next morning, she walked the children to the bus stop. Clara held her hand tighter than usual. Eli offered a quiet, "Thanks for the cookies, Grandma," before boarding the bus. Eleanor nodded, forcing a smile. When she returned home, Lena was scrubbing the counter, her back turned. Eleanor cleared her throat. "I wanted to say—" Lena cut her off. "I need to be clear, Eleanor. I appreciate your help, but this isn't your house. It's important that you remember that." Something in Eleanor cracked. Not with rage, not with drama. Just a quiet snap. Like a branch finally giving way under years of unnoticed weight. She nodded. Of course. Then she went upstairs, folded the children's laundry, and placed their clothes neatly on their beds. She dusted the picture frames on the hallway wall, pausing at one photo of Walter in uniform, holding baby James. She touched the glass. The silence of the house wrapped around her like fog, and Eleanor realized for the first time that maybe she didn't belong here at all. The letter arrived on a gray Thursday morning, tucked between an electric bill and a local coupon flyer. Eleanor almost didn't see it. The handwriting on the envelope stopped her breath. It was impossibly familiar. Loopy cursive, slightly slanted right, written in blue ink. Her name, Mrs. Eleanor Reese. No return address. She stood at the kitchen counter, the morning sun slicing across the wood like a blade, and opened it with trembling fingers. "Dearest Maggie," it began. Maggie. Only Walter had called her that. A silly nickname from college, short for Magnolia because she used to tuck flowers into her hair. "I hope this finds you well. I've thought of you every day. There's so much I want to say, but I'll start here. I miss you. I miss us." The handwriting wasn't just similar, it was his. The loops of the G, the long tails on his Y's, the way he always dotted his I's a little too far to the left. Her knees gave out and she sank slowly into the kitchen chair. The letter went on to describe things only Walter could have known. Their honeymoon drive through the Smoky Mountains, the way she always dipped French fries into vanilla milkshakes, the song she hummed while washing dishes, little nothings, but they made her chest tighten with ache. He spoke of regret. He wrote, "If I could go back, I'd choose a quieter life, one with you. I hope you've forgiven me, even if I never truly said goodbye." Eleanor pressed the paper to her chest and cried. For the first time in years, she let herself grieve, not just the man she had lost, but the hope she had buried with him. That night, she couldn't sleep. She reread the letter 3 times, then placed it in her nightstand drawer, wrapped in an old silk scarf. The next morning, she woke before dawn. The house still slept as she brewed tea and sat by the window, watching light seep slowly into the world. She felt lighter, like some weight had shifted off her shoulders, even if only slightly. She didn't tell James or Lena. It felt too delicate, too precious. A gift not meant to be shared. A week later, a second letter arrived. This one was longer, filled with tender memories and subtle humor. Walter wrote about missing her banana pudding, teasing her for always hiding the remote, and recalled their last real argument over whether their neighbor's dog was a collie or a retriever. "I was wrong," he wrote. "It was a retriever. You were always right, Maggie." She laughed out loud, startling Eli, who was doing homework at the kitchen table. "Everything okay, Grandma?" he asked. "More than okay," she replied. The letters became a rhythm. Every Thursday, without fail, a new envelope arrived, each one a balm to her soul. She began to look forward to mail again, not for bills or junk, but for that familiar blue script and the rush of warmth it brought. She responded, though she never mailed her replies. She wrote in a private notebook, line after line of words she wished she could say aloud. "I'm still mad you left me. I still sleep on your side of the bed. James misses you, though he won't say it. Clara has your chin." Sometimes she ended her entries with, "I love you," then crossed it out. She didn't know what to believe. Was Walter alive? Had he faked his death? Was this some miraculous return? Her heart dared to imagine, even as her mind warned caution. Still, the handwriting, the details, the tone. It was him. On the 5th week, the letter included a photograph, an old one. The two of them at a 4th of July barbecue, Eleanor in a wide-brimmed hat, Walter in suspenders, both laughing mid-bite into watermelon slices. The photo had aged, but not in a way a print from the internet would. It had texture, subtle creases, a smudge on the edge. She ran her fingers over it like a relic. Was he watching her somehow? Close by? Did he regret leaving? The idea wrapped around her like a warm shawl, not because she wanted him back, but because it meant someone still saw her, still remembered, still loved her. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in months. Her dreams were filled with sunlit picnics and porch swings. She awoke with the ghost of Walter's voice in her ears, calling her Maggie, just like he used to, with that teasing drawl that always made her blush, even after 30 years. She floated through the following days. Lena's icy silences didn't sting. James's distracted nods barely registered. The kids' growing distance still ached, but it was dulled, softened by the new companionship in her letters. Eleanor had a secret again, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like she mattered. She kept the letters in a small wooden box lined with velvet, hidden beneath her winter scarves. Every Thursday, after receiving the newest envelope, she'd reread the others, creating a ritual of remembering. It became her anchor. And though she never spoke of them aloud, Eleanor's posture began to change. Her shoulders lifted, her eyes sparkled. She began to hum again in the kitchen, a tune only Walter would recognize. And somewhere deep in her soul, a seed of belief took root. Maybe miracles were real. Maybe Walter had found his way back to her. Maybe she wasn't as invisible as they all thought. The 8th letter arrived on a rainy morning, the kind that made the windows fog and the house feel like it was exhaling in slow, damp sighs. Eleanor wiped her hands on a dish towel, heart already fluttering with anticipation as she slit the envelope open. "Dearest Maggie," it began, as always. "I imagine the kitchen smelled like rosemary last night. Lena's roast chicken always had just the right amount." Eleanor froze. Her eyes hovered over the sentence. Rosemary chicken. It was true. Lena had made it last night, a rare moment when dinner felt like a gathering instead of a cold routine. But how would Walter know that? The letter was postmarked days ago. She reread the line, willing herself to believe it was a coincidence. Maybe he remembered Lena's cooking style. Maybe it was a lucky guess. But something inside her wavered. She read the letter again, and again. Then slowly she opened the box of past letters, flipping through them in sequence. Her fingers scanned each line like a detective searching for hidden code. One mentioned Clara's new haircut. Another referenced a movie James had taken Eli to see, an obscure indie film that Eleanor herself hadn't even known about until days after. There were too many details, too many references to recent events, too accurate. Her mind stirred with discomfort. What if... She closed the box, hands trembling. The idea slithered into her thoughts quietly, shamefully. What if these weren't from Walter? No, that couldn't be. She paced the living room, looked out the window, sat, stood again. It was impossible. And yet, that night, Eleanor lingered in the hallway after bedtime. She stood outside James and Lena's bedroom, listening to murmurs through the closed door. They weren't arguing, just low voices, indistinct. She crept back to her room, but sleep didn't come. The next morning, she rose early and began watching the mailbox. She waited 5 days. On the 6th, the mail arrived. She watched from the kitchen window as the postman passed. She counted envelopes on the table as James sorted through them, then paused, one letter in hand. Eleanor's letter. He looked at it too long. Then quietly, he slid it beneath the stack and walked away. She waited until the hallway was clear, then retrieved the letter. Same handwriting, same scent of faint cologne, Walter's cologne, or something close. Same nickname, Maggie. She brought it to her room, locked the door, and sat staring at it for a full hour before opening it. Inside, more memories, more warmth, and another eerie reference. "You probably wore that navy cardigan last night. You always did when the wind howled." She had worn it, the one with the loose button, the one Walter loved. Her stomach twisted. Someone was watching her, or... someone in the house was fabricating all of this. But who? She considered Lena, but the tone of the letters didn't match her precision or emotional detachment. The warmth was too genuine. The handwriting too practiced. Lena wouldn't use terms like, "my darling girl," or remember the way Eleanor curled her toes when nervous. No, it wasn't Lena. Her thoughts turned to James. He had access to the mailbox. He knew Walter's handwriting. He'd seen enough of it growing up. He had old photos, perhaps even some of his father's things. Could it be? She tried to recall moments. Had he ever slipped up? Made a reference that aligned with a letter before it arrived? She remembered one time just 2 weeks ago when she'd mentioned a memory from her wedding day, the boutonniere pinned askew, and James had nodded, finishing the story before she did. She hadn't told him that part. The next letter had referenced the same moment, in nearly the same words. A knot formed in her chest. Was this his way of coping? Did he miss Walter so much that he had created this elaborate illusion? Was he trying to comfort her, or himself? And if it was true, how could she be angry? The realization didn't bring anger. It brought something quieter, sadder. She thought of James as a boy, kneeling by the garden, asking Walter to tie his shoelaces. She remembered the years after Walter's disappearance, how James had never cried, had simply shut down, buried himself in work and responsibility. Had this been his silent grief all along? That evening, Eleanor made his favorite meal, chicken pot pie, and set an extra plate at the table. James raised an eyebrow. Expecting someone? She smiled. No, just a habit. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on the empty chair. Later, when the house went to sleep, Eleanor stood in her room, letter in hand. She whispered, "I don't know if it's you, Walter, or if it's you, James, but thank you." And for the first time, she didn't place the letter in the velvet box. She tucked it beneath James's door. It was the 12th letter that finally pushed Eleanor into action. The handwriting, the stories, the emotional pulse, everything still felt so real, but doubt had taken root, and it grew with each line she read. She couldn't live in limbo any longer, not knowing if her husband had returned or if she was chasing ghosts painted by someone else's hand. So one afternoon, while Lena was out running errands and James was at work, Eleanor slipped the letter into her purse, along with a torn page from her notebook. On it, she had written the address stamped on every envelope, a nondescript location on the outskirts of town, a retirement facility. She took the bus, each jolt and turn rattling her more than the last. Her fingers clenched the strap of her bag. Her thoughts tumbled between terror and foolish hope. What if Walter really was there? What if he'd been hiding, ashamed or uncertain, and this was his way of reaching out? What if she walked through those doors and saw him? The facility was small and well kept, with trimmed hedges and a painted sign that read, "Evergreen Pines Assisted Living." Eleanor approached the front desk, forcing a polite smile. "Hi, I'm looking for someone. Walter Reese. I believe he's a resident here?" The receptionist, young, cheerful, typed the name into her computer, then frowned. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We don't have anyone here by that name." Eleanor's smile faltered. "Could you check again? He might be listed under Walter D. Reese?" Another pause. The receptionist shook her head. "I'm really sorry. There's no one with that name. First or last." Eleanor pulled the envelope from her bag, but the letter was mailed from here. This stamp, this address, it's from this building. The woman looked closely. Her brow furrowed. "Oh, yes, this address is correct, but we don't do outgoing mail here. Some people rent our mailing service. We share a post office box with a few small businesses nearby. Sometimes people pay to have return addresses listed here for privacy." Eleanor's stomach dropped. "So, anyone could use this address?" "Pretty much, yes. It's not monitored closely." Her hands went cold. She stared at the letter like it had turned to ash in her palm. The receptionist leaned forward, concerned. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Eleanor nodded numbly, mumbled a thank you, and left. The ride home felt longer. She sat rigid on the bus, heart racing, thoughts spinning. If Walter wasn't here? If he hadn't written the letters? Then who had? Back at the house, she waited until after dinner. Lena was upstairs bathing the children, humming softly. James had stepped out to take a phone call. The house was quiet. Eleanor crept into the guest room. Turned office Lena used. She hadn't entered it in months, not since the day Lena politely but firmly said, "Please knock before using this room. It's where I keep my things." The doorknob turned easily. The room was pristine, always was. Lena ran the house like a museum. Eleanor moved to the desk. Nothing obvious, just bills, a planner, pens aligned in perfect rows. Then she opened the side drawer. Stationery, cream-colored, monogrammed, the same kind as the letters. Her pulse quickened. She opened the bottom drawer. More papers. An old shoebox. She pulled it out and flipped the lid. Inside, ink bottles, several blue pens, a pair of reading glasses that weren't hers, and a bottle of cologne. Walter's cologne. Her breath caught. She lifted the bottle. It was nearly empty. The scent was unmistakable. Shoving it aside, she rifled deeper and found a folder. Inside, drafts. Rough drafts of the letters, scribbled out sentences, pages half finished in handwriting that, when examined closely, was almost, but not quite, Walter's. Too careful, too consistent. At the bottom of the folder, a lined page with handwriting practice. Maggie, my dearest Maggie, I miss you, my Maggie. Eleanor felt her knees weaken. She dropped into the office chair, staring at the mess before her. It was Lena. Lena had been writing the letters. Why? Why would she do this? To manipulate, to control her emotions? Or worse, out of pity? The bile rose in her throat. She imagined Lena sitting at this very desk, dipping pen in ink, trying to mimic Walter's voice, his quirks, his soul. It was a performance, a trick. The final illusion that kept Eleanor afloat, torn to pieces in her hands. Her eyes stung. She had clung to those letters like lifelines, believed in them, written back to them, dreamed about them. And all along, they were lies, constructed by the woman who barely tolerated her. The woman who stole her place in the kitchen, the mother role in the house, and now Walter's memory. She sat there for a long time, unable to move. The only sound was the faint creak of the floor upstairs, Clara's laughter and the hum of the heater cycling on. Life carried on. But Eleanor didn't. Not in that moment. Because that day, Walter didn't die again. Eleanor did. Eleanor didn't know how long she sat in the office chair, the draft letters spread across her lap like the remnants of a burnt-down home. Her hands trembled, not with sorrow now, but with something sharper, hotter, anger. Not the loud, flailing kind, but the quiet rage that simmers in the gut, steady and dangerous. She stood slowly, closed the folder, and returned everything to the drawer exactly as she had found it. When she exited the room, her face was calm, her steps light. She smiled at Clara in the hallway and kissed the top of Eli's head, but inside her, something had shifted irrevocably. That night, when the house went to sleep, Eleanor didn't. She waited. At 2:17 a.m., when the silence was absolute, she crept back into the office. This time, she brought gloves. She booted up Lena's computer, heart thudding in her ears. The desktop was organized, clinical. Folders labeled budgets, meal plans, school records. But tucked into a folder named simply Archive, Eleanor found it. A video file, unnamed, time-stamped from 8 months ago. She clicked, at first static, then a shaky camera view of a sunny porch, a man's back, broad shoulders, a familiar slouch. Then he turned. Walter. Older, yes, grayer, thinner, but unmistakably him. He was laughing, arm draped casually over a woman no older than James. She leaned into him, smiling like they shared a secret. Eleanor's breath caught. Her stomach twisted. The woman kissed Walter's cheek. He said something, muffled by the camera, but she caught one phrase. Glad that chapter's finally closed. The screen blurred, then ended. Eleanor replayed it. Once. Twice. She sat still, staring at the frozen final frame. Walter smiling. Happy. Alive. Tears welled in her eyes, not from grief, but betrayal. He hadn't died, he hadn't been lost, he had left, and worse, he had stayed gone, chosen someone else, built a new life, and never once reached back for her. She closed the file, bile rising in her throat. Back in the archive folder, she found emails, dozens of them, from Walter to Lena, short, coded. Thanks for keeping things quiet. Transferring next week, same amount. Hope she settled in. Don't stir anything up. She stared at the screen, her chest hollowing. Walter had paid Lena, paid her to lie, to distract, to fabricate closure. He had known exactly where she was, what she was going through, and he did nothing. Worse, he orchestrated it. The letters, the fake return address, the false hope. It wasn't Lena alone. It was both of them, together. Eleanor's hands clenched on the desk, her teeth gritted. The betrayal sliced deeper than she thought possible. For weeks she had clung to those letters as a thread of life, had imagined Walter writing them in quiet remorse, trying to reach her, to say sorry. But the reality? They had crafted an illusion to pacify her, to keep her quiet, like tossing breadcrumbs to a starving bird and hoping it wouldn't fly too close. She was never meant to know. She was never meant to matter. She leaned back in the chair, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. Her husband was alive, and he had erased her. She wanted to scream, to tear the screen from the desk, to throw the perfume bottle across the hallway and shatter it into 1,000 jagged memories. But instead, she turned off the monitor. She packed her emotions back into the calm she wore like a mask. She walked to her room, closed the door gently, and for the first time since moving in, she locked it. The next morning, Eleanor rose early. She made breakfast, eggs, toast, fresh fruit. She smiled at the children. She thanked Lena for the nice roast chicken last night. She complimented James's shirt. No one noticed the difference, except Clara, who studied her quietly, like something in Grandma had gone dim. Eleanor packed a bag that afternoon. Not much, just a few clothes, a photo album, and her journal. She wrapped the perfume bottle in a scarf and placed it at the bottom, a memory, a lesson. She left the fake letters in the velvet box, left the truth behind in the computer, and by evening, Eleanor had vanished. No note, no forwarding address, no goodbye. Because sometimes the most deafening scream is silence, and Eleanor Reese had finally decided that her story wasn't over, but she'd be damned if they got to write the rest of it. The bus rolled into the small Tennessee town just after sunrise, its brakes hissing against the still morning. Eleanor stepped off with a single suitcase, a canvas tote, and no plan beyond this moment. The air smelled of river water and fresh bread. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked once, then fell silent. She had picked the town at random. It had no significance, no memories, no connections to the life she left behind, and that was exactly what she needed. The town was nestled beside a wide, slow river. Old brick buildings lined the main street, their windows filled with handmade quilts, local jams, and faded signs advertising antiques. A place untouched by hurry, a place where people still waved at strangers. She walked until her feet ached, her joints stiff from the bus ride. Then she saw the sign, rooms, weekly or monthly, inquire within. It hung crookedly in the window of a blue house with peeling shutters and a porch wrapped in vines. Eleanor climbed the steps and knocked. Hazel answered, mid-60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a gray braid that fell down her back and eyes that missed nothing. She looked Eleanor over once, no judgment, just quiet calculation, and said, "You eat eggs?" Startled, Eleanor nodded. "Then come on, I've got coffee too." That was how it started. Hazel had been a widow for 10 years. She ran a tiny bakery next door and rented out 2 upstairs rooms in her house. She didn't ask questions, not the kind Eleanor expected, just practical things. You allergic to anything? Can you handle a cash register? You prefer tea or coffee in the morning? Within an hour, Eleanor had a key. By sunset, she had a bed, a clean towel, and the quietest night she'd had in years. The next day, she followed Hazel into the bakery. It was nothing like the big city cafes she remembered. No espresso machines or gluten-free labels, just a wooden counter, 3 round tables, and the smell of cinnamon and butter. The pastries were hand-shaped, the prices scribbled on a chalkboard. The regulars came early. Farmers, mailmen, 2 high school teachers. Hazel knew them all by name, but no one stared too hard at Eleanor. No one pried. She started behind the counter, pouring coffee, wiping tables, arranging muffins. At first, her hands shook. She fumbled the coins, forgot orders, spilled cream on the counter. But Hazel said nothing, just refilled the napkin holder and moved on. By the end of the week, Eleanor knew how each customer took their drink. She laughed once, out loud, at a joke from the mailman. It startled her. The sound felt strange in her throat, but no one blinked. The laughter stayed. So did she. In the evenings, she sat on the back porch with Hazel sipping tea. They spoke in fragments, weather, old movies, music, but never about the past. Eleanor noticed Hazel wore her wedding ring on a chain around her neck. She never asked why. That, perhaps, was the unspoken agreement between them. We don't dig where we've buried things. 2 weeks in, Eleanor found herself waking before her alarm. She baked scones without being asked. She added a vase of wildflowers to the front counter. The customers started greeting her by name. "Morning, Miss Ellie." She didn't correct them. It became a nickname, and it stuck. Miss Ellie of the River Bakery. And strangely, beautifully, she liked it. No one asked if she had children. No one called her mom. No one expected her to give, to sacrifice, to apologize for existing. She was just Eleanor, or Ellie, or whoever she chose to be that day. Sometimes she walked along the riverbank in the evening, watching the light dance on the water. She breathed, not in shallow survival gasps, but deep, grounding breaths, the kind that filled the lungs, the kind she hadn't taken in years. She started journaling again, not about grief or letters, but about scones and porch swings and the sound of rain on the tin roof. The past wasn't gone, but here, it didn't follow her like a shadow. Here it simply sat beside her quietly, and that was enough. Spring in the riverside town came slowly, like a hesitant apology. Trees stretched out their limbs after a long sleep, and the scent of fresh earth drifted through the air. Eleanor found herself drawn to the patch of yard behind Hazel's house, a neglected sliver of soil, overgrown and stubborn. She bought seeds from a corner shop, lavender, marigold, sweet peas. She worked the ground with bare hands, letting the dirt get under her nails. Hazel lent her old gloves, but Eleanor liked the feel of earth on skin. It reminded her that she was still alive. Each morning, she tended to the garden before the bakery opened, kneeling in the cool dew, pulling weeds, planting roots. There was something sacred in the routine, quiet, purposeful, her own. And as the flowers began to sprout, so did something else. A thought, a longing. Not for what was lost, but for connection. A different kind, one not tethered to obligation or shared history. She didn't want to talk to the past anymore. She wanted to speak into the world, not as a mother, not as a wife, but simply as Eleanor. So she began to write letters, not to anyone in particular, just letters, short, handwritten notes, folded into small squares, tucked into library books, grocery shelves, bus stops. They read like this: "You are not invisible. I see you, even if no one else does. Your kindness matters, even if it feels ignored. You're allowed to leave, even if they say you owe them more. You are not what they reduced you to." She signed each with a simple, looping E. Hazel caught her once, slipping a letter between 2 cans of soup at the general store. "What's that?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Just something I needed to say. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too." Hazel didn't pry. She just handed Eleanor a pen. "Use mine next time. Smoother ink." Eleanor laughed, and something opened inside her. She kept writing. One morning, she left a letter in a coffee shop across town, her furthest journey yet. She sat near the back, ordered tea, and left the note on the windowsill. "You can start over, even now." She didn't see who picked it up. Didn't want to. That wasn't the point. Weeks passed. The garden bloomed. The bakery gained customers. Eleanor's letters grew bolder, more heartfelt. She wrote to the unseen, the single mothers, the tired grandfathers, the awkward teenagers, the lonely cashiers. Writing became her own quiet revolution, a rebellion against silence. Then one Thursday, Hazel slapped a copy of the Tennessee Morning on the bakery counter. "You see this?" Eleanor wiped flour from her hands and leaned over. There, on the second page, under a section titled "Letters That Found Us," was her handwriting. Her note. Word for word. Photographed and printed, nestled beside a short editor's note. "We found this tucked inside a returned book at the public library. No name, no explanation, just a quiet reminder that words still have power. We don't know who E is, but we'd like to thank her." Eleanor blinked. Hazel grinned. "So Miss Ellie, local celebrity now, are we?" "I didn't. I never thought anyone would..." Eleanor stammered. "Exactly," Hazel said, "and yet they did." Over the next week, more people came into the bakery, not just for bread, but to ask quietly if she'd seen any more of the E letters. Eleanor played dumb, but her heart thudded with a new rhythm. She wasn't hiding, but she wasn't claiming either. It was something in between, a quiet offering. One afternoon, a young woman in her 20s came in, clutching a folded piece of paper. She looked nervous, eyes darting around until they landed on Eleanor. "I found this in my mailbox," she whispered. "I don't know who wrote it, but it stopped me from doing something stupid." Eleanor didn't respond right away, just reached across the counter and squeezed the girl's hand. She never asked what the letter said. She didn't need to. That night, Eleanor stood by her garden under the moonlight. The marigolds glowed faintly. The lavender swayed in rhythm with the wind. She wasn't the same woman who had walked off a bus with a broken heart and a suitcase of silence. She wasn't a ghost in someone else's home anymore. She was soil-stained, ink-fingered, and blooming, one letter at a time. The first letter pinned to the bakery wall wasn't Eleanor's. It came from a teenage boy, shy, freckled, irregular, who always bought the same cinnamon roll and never made eye contact. One day, he left an envelope on the counter. Hazel found it after closing and slid it toward Eleanor with a shrug. "Looks like your movement's growing legs." Inside was a neatly written note. "To the woman who left a message in my locker. I don't know how you knew I needed to hear it, but I did. You probably saved me. Thank you. T." Eleanor didn't say much, just folded the letter carefully and pinned it near the register. By week's end, there were 4 more, then 10. Some were scribbled on notebook paper, others typed. Some included poems, photographs, or simply said thank you. None were signed with full names. No one asked who E was. The town had settled into a comfortable unknowing, choosing wonder over truth. Hazel dedicated a wall to the letters, cleared a patch of paint above the pastry case, and called it the quiet wall. Locals started bringing their coffee just to stand and read. Customers came in, lingered longer. Some cried, some smiled. Some left envelopes in the tip jar or tucked behind sugar jars. The bakery transformed. It wasn't just a place for bread anymore. It became a sanctuary. And at the heart of it all was Eleanor, Miss Ellie to everyone who didn't know better, the woman with flour on her apron and ink on her fingers. The woman who never claimed credit but always smiled just a little too knowingly when a new letter arrived. Children began leaving crayon drawings addressed to the lady who writes. An elderly man who had just lost his wife brought a note that simply said, "I thought I was the only one." A mother wrote about postpartum loneliness. A soldier left a folded flag and a single line. "You reminded me why I came back." Each note deepened the silence between Eleanor's ribs. but in the best way. A silence no longer hollow, but full of weight, of meaning, of presence. Hazel printed a small card and framed it beside the register. This wall belongs to anyone who has ever needed to hear something kind. No name, no rules, just words. They didn't advertise, but word spread. Soon travelers began stopping in after hearing whispers online. There's a bakery in Tennessee with a wall that'll change your day. A woman from Chicago brought cookies she baked from a family recipe and left a letter beside them. A man from Florida hugged Eleanor wordlessly and pressed a note into her palm. People didn't want selfies or photos. They wanted connection, and Eleanor gave it to them without revealing a thing. No one knew her past, her family, her scars. No one asked why she'd come to this town. All they knew was the calm in her voice, the strength in her posture, the softness in her eyes. To them, Miss Ellie had always been here. She started waking with a sense of lightness. Her back didn't ache as much. Her hands, once stiff and tired, moved swiftly with dough and paper alike. The mornings became rituals: knead, roll, write. Sometimes she'd write just one sentence and tape it to the register. "You're doing better than you think." Sometimes she'd write a whole page and burn it in the back garden, letting the smoke carry it into the trees. Hazel watched with quiet pride. She never pried, never pushed, just handed Eleanor tea and smiled like she knew things no one else did. Eleanor had stopped counting the weeks. She didn't think about Walter anymore, or Lena, or James. Not with bitterness. They simply faded, blurred into the background like old radio static behind a favorite song. And in the foreground, the letters, the people, the healing. One Saturday morning, a local journalist stopped by. A woman in her 40s, curious but respectful. She asked to write a piece about the wall. Eleanor hesitated. "It's not really about me," she said. "Exactly," the journalist replied. "That's what makes it special." So Eleanor agreed. The article ran the next week in the regional paper. Its headline read, "The Bakery That Speaks Without a Voice." They used a photo of the wall, not Eleanor's face, just the corner of her hand pinning up a letter. The town swelled with pride. Locals brought in family members, friends, neighbors. Letters doubled, then tripled. Miss Ellie became something more than a person. She became a feeling, a story, a reminder that kindness didn't need a spotlight, that healing could come from the simplest of gestures. And in this quiet revolution of ink and paper, Eleanor found something she never expected to feel again: home. It was after the bakery closed on a stormy Thursday that Hazel spoke the words Eleanor never expected to hear. The windows rattled with wind. Rain tapped a steady rhythm on the tin roof, and the sky hung low, heavy with unspoken things. Eleanor was drying mugs while Hazel counted the register, the silence between them comfortable as old slippers. Then Hazel said, without lifting her eyes, "My husband left me too." Eleanor's hand paused mid-wipe. She turned slowly, watching Hazel stack bills with mechanical precision. "He left," Hazel repeated, "but not the kind of leaving people talk about. Not death, not deployment. He left because there was someone else, someone younger, quieter. He said I'd grown too sharp." The word sat bitter on her tongue. "I found out the same week I got promoted. First female senior nurse in my unit. I came home, ready to celebrate, and there was a note on the table and an empty closet." Eleanor set the mug down gently. "I'm sorry," she said. Hazel shrugged. "That was 20 years ago. I've grown more things than grudges since then." They stood in silence again, but now it hummed with a different energy, one of shared scars, invisible but tender. Eleanor sat at the corner table, folding napkins absently. "It still surprises me," she murmured, "how something that happened so long ago can feel like it's happening all over again, just when you think you've healed." Hazel looked at her. "That's because healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You come back to the same place, but each time you're a little higher, a little stronger." Eleanor smiled softly. You always know what to say. Hazel poured them both tea, no cream, 1 sugar. They sipped in near darkness, listening to the storm. After a long pause, Hazel set her cup down and leaned forward. There's something else I should tell you. Eleanor's heartbeat picked up. Hazel's eyes didn't flinch. I knew Walter was alive. The words landed like thunder. Eleanor didn't speak. Couldn't. She gripped her cup tighter, knuckles white. I didn't know everything, Hazel said quickly. But I knew he didn't die the way you were told. I recognized his name the first week you moved in. Eleanor's lips parted. How? Hazel took a breath. I was an army nurse for over 30 years. I served 2 tours in Germany. Your husband was stationed near my base. Not long after he was listed as MIA, I saw him again, briefly, on civilian leave. He was with a woman, not you. Eleanor closed her eyes. I didn't confront him. Wasn't my place. But I remembered his face, his name. You mentioned him once early on, and I made the connection. Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor's voice cracked, half whisper, half ache. Hazel looked down. Because you weren't ready. Because you needed to come to the truth on your own terms. If I'd told you, you might have shut down, or run back to find answers you weren't prepared for. Eleanor felt anger surge, then falter, because deep down, she understood. Hazel had given her space, not just physically, but emotionally. She had made no assumptions, given no advice, just room, space to break, space to rebuild. I wasn't trying to protect him, Hazel added. I was trying to protect you. Eleanor's hands trembled. She wasn't angry, not really. She was exposed, like a wound peeled open again just when it had started to scab over. I thought I was the only one, she whispered. Hazel reached across the table, laid her palm gently on Eleanor's. You're not, she said, not even close. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred. 2 women, 2 stories, different threads, same tapestry. They didn't need to say more. The storm outside slowed to a drizzle. The air in the bakery warmed. Hazel stood and stretched. Come on, let's pin one last letter tonight. Eleanor followed her to the wall. She pulled a folded note from her apron and smoothed it out. Hazel handed her a pin. Together, they fixed the letter to the center of the wall, right above the others. It read, To the woman who stayed quiet for too long, you are not broken. You were just made to bloom in silence. Now it's time to speak. E. They stood back, read it again. And this time, Eleanor didn't feel like she was speaking to someone else. She felt like she was speaking to herself, the woman she used to be, the woman she was becoming, the woman she had never dared to be. The bell above the bakery door jingled at 11:07 on a breezy Saturday morning, later than the usual rush, right in that lull where the scent of fresh scones still clung to the air, but the tables had begun to clear. Eleanor was behind the counter, wiping crumbs into her palm, half listening to Hazel hum from the back kitchen. She didn't look up at first, not until a child's voice rang out, too familiar to ignore. Mom, look! The letters are real! Eleanor froze. Her fingers went still mid-wipe. The cloth balled tightly in her fist. She turned slowly. There they were. James, taller, grayer, the same tired slump in his shoulders. Lena, her hair tied neatly, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like a shield. And Clara, 12 now, lankier but unmistakably Clara, stood in front of the wall pointing up at a letter taped near the top. I saw this on TikTok, she said excitedly. It's the place with the secret letters. I told you, didn't I? Lena gave a tight smile. You did, sweetheart. James looked around, taking in the bakery's cozy interior, his eyes scanning across the cases, the chalkboard menu, the shelf of Take One, Leave One books. Eleanor shrank behind the counter before catching herself. She took a breath, straightened. You're not hiding anymore. Hazel stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron, and noticed the shift in energy. Her eyes darted between Eleanor and the family across the room. She said nothing, just gave the slightest nod, letting Eleanor decide. Clara was moving closer to the wall, eyes wide, scanning every letter like it held buried treasure. Then she stopped. Her fingers touched the corner of a note tucked near the bottom. One Eleanor had written on a quiet Wednesday, after a dream about Clara's laughter echoing through an empty house. The note read, "To the one who feels like they don't belong, you are not too much. You are not too soft. You are not forgotten." Clara turned, brows furrowed. "This looks like..." She squinted, then gasped. "Grandma's writing." Lena glanced up, alarm flickering across her face. James looked too. And Eleanor. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained calm. Clara walked slowly toward the counter, the letter still in her hand. The room was quiet now, just the sound of air moving through the vents and the faint buzz of traffic outside. Clara's voice was soft. "Miss Ellie?" Eleanor met her eyes. It was like looking into a mirror from another time. Clara's gaze full of questions, innocence, and something else. Hope. James stepped forward. His face had gone pale. "Mom?" Lena didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on Eleanor's hands, as if the truth was written in flour and ink stains. Eleanor didn't confirm, didn't deny. She simply smiled. "Welcome," she said gently. "We're known for our cinnamon rolls." James opened his mouth, closed it. He stepped back, his breath shallow. Clara, still staring, whispered, "It is you." Eleanor nodded once. "I've been here a while. Why didn't you..." Clara began, but Hazel appeared beside her, setting down a tray of cookies. "Some journeys," Hazel said quietly, "are meant to be taken alone." Lena finally spoke, voice brittle. "We thought you were... gone." Eleanor tilted her head. "I was." And in that moment, every unsaid word stretched between them like a bridge made of glass. James stepped forward again, eyes glossy. "I didn't know," he said. "I didn't understand what we were doing to you." Eleanor looked at him. Really looked. Saw the lines around his eyes, the heaviness in his shoulders, and something inside her, something hard and heavy, shifted. Not forgiveness, but recognition. She didn't need apologies. She didn't need closure. She had already found it in the quiet mornings, in the ink of anonymous letters, in the voices of strangers who saw her not as someone's mother or someone's wife, but as herself. Clara stepped closer and took her hand. "Can we stay?" she asked. Eleanor smiled. "For coffee?" Clara nodded. Eleanor squeezed her fingers. "Of course." And as the family sat at a corner table, surrounded by the words she had written, Eleanor returned to the counter. Not as someone hiding, but as someone seen. Truly, finally. The cafe was quieter now. The rush had passed, and the family sat in the corner booth like they belonged to another time. James stirred his coffee without drinking it. Clara clutched the note she had found. Lena scrolled her phone in silence, avoiding Eleanor's eyes. And Walter stood near the door, unsure if he should come closer, unsure if he had the right. He had entered unnoticed, seconds after James, hanging back by the wall like a ghost too hesitant to haunt. But Eleanor saw him. Of course she did. She saw the way his hand curled into a fist and unclenched, the way his eyes flicked from her to the letters to the space between them. He wore the same cologne, the same uncertain smile. And yet, she didn't look at him. Not directly, not even once. Instead, she returned to the counter, wrote a receipt for an order that never came, and tucked something small and white beneath a stone by the register. Hazel knew. She didn't ask, just moved aside as Eleanor untied her apron, smoothed her skirt, and took one final glance around the place that had been more home than any house she'd ever lived in. Then Eleanor walked to Clara, knelt beside her, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You're going to be someone remarkable," she whispered. Clara's voice shook. "Please don't leave again." Eleanor smiled. "I'm not leaving. I'm just moving forward." She stood, walked past Lena, who opened her mouth but no sound came, past James, who reached for her hand but she didn't stop, and past Walter, who turned toward her, eyes pleading, lips parting to speak. But she didn't look, didn't blink, didn't break stride. She walked straight to the back of the cafe, through the kitchen where the scent of bread and cinnamon still lingered, and out the rear door into the soft golden light of late afternoon. Gone. Just like that. Not with drama, not with tears, but with grace, with dignity, with the kind of silence that speaks louder than any goodbye. Inside, James stood slowly and walked to the counter. He saw the folded note under the stone and lifted it carefully. Hazel didn't stop him. He read it once, then twice, then passed it to Lena. Clara stood on her tiptoes to read. Even Walter, after a long pause, stepped forward to glimpse the words Eleanor had left behind. The letter was short, written in her signature flowing cursive. "Don't try to find me. I have found myself. E." No accusation, no bitterness, only a closing sentence to the chapter they had tried so long to write on her behalf. Walter stepped back, his eyes damp, but he didn't cry. He knew. He had lost her long ago. He had handed her grief and silence and absence, and she had turned it into poetry and strength and something so wholly her own that he no longer recognized the woman who once curled beside him under a blanket in Germany. James looked at Hazel. Where did she go? Hazel shrugged, but her eyes were kind. Somewhere better. Clara clutched the letter to her chest. Outside, the sun dipped lower. Somewhere, not far from the bakery, a river glistened, and in a small garden behind a blue house with peeling shutters, the marigolds stood taller than ever. That night, Hazel lit a single candle in the bakery. She pinned Eleanor's final letter to the center of the wall. Customers would ask about it for weeks. Some would cry, some would nod. And one day, months later, another letter would appear. Different handwriting, but the same message. "I found myself too, thank you." Eleanor didn't stop walking until the town disappeared behind her. She didn't take a bus, didn't call a cab. She walked until her feet ached, until her thoughts settled, until she could hear only birdsong and her own breath. She found a room in another town, smaller, quieter. The woman who owned the place had a dog and a porch swing and a habit of humming without realizing it. Eleanor unpacked a single bag. She kept no photos, no souvenirs, only a pen and a notebook. She sat that night on the porch swing, watching the stars bloom across the dark. She wrote a new letter, not to the past, not to the people she left behind, but to herself. It said, "You were not selfish for leaving. You were brave. You were not cruel for going silent. You were healing. You are not alone. You are becoming." And she signed it, Love, E.